Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's State of the District and Region Conference. My name is Brett Green, and I serve as chair of the DC Chamber's Government Affairs Committee. The Government Affairs Committee is one of the most visible and active committees in the DC Chamber. Our officials definitely keep this committee extremely busy. I'm also the president and CEO of American Management Corporation, which I founded in 2001. As a business, we are actively tracking almost everything that's happening in Washington, D.C., and we specialize in advising our clients on navigating our local and regional landscape. Now, let me introduce our panelists. Michael Bryce Sadler is our moderator. Michael is a reporter with the Washington Post and covers the D.C. government and politics for the Washington Post Metro desk. Thank you, Michael. Penelope Gross serves as vice chair of the Board of Supervisors for Fairfax County, Virginia. Penny Gross was first elected to the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, representing the Mason District in November of 1995. The Honorable Calvin Hawkins serves as council member at large for Prince George's County, Maryland. Council member Hawkins has been a bridge between competing political interests and is very well known for bringing people of varying interests together on several highly sensitive issues, and he's also very well known for getting things done. Our Honorable Phil Mendelson, who is the chairman of our DC City Council. Phil was first elected to the DC Council as an at-large member in 1998. In 2012, Phil's DC Council colleagues selected him to become the chairman of the DC Council. And as chairman, Phil leads the council on all legislative matters and serves as the chair for the Committee of the Whole with specific oversight of the district budget. And finally, our last panelist is County Executive Mark Elrich, County Executive for Montgomery County. Executive Elrich was elected to Montgomery County Council, was elected as County Executive on November 6, 2018. He had previously served 3 terms, 12 years on the Montgomery County Council as an at-large member, having first been elected in 2006. It's going to be very interesting to hear this panel discuss their issues from local and regional perspectives. Thank you again, guests. Thank you, panelists. And Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brett, and good afternoon again to all of our panelists. It's my honor to moderate this panel now for the 3rd consecutive year. And we'll be having a discussion today about how various issues across the region impact the people and working and living here. And if we're fortunate enough, we'll get some questions from the audience as well, so I'll try to leave time for that. But in the meantime, let's jump right in. So each year since 2021, I've kicked things off with a question about the region's recovery from the COVID pandemic and the impact on local businesses and the community. I want to stick with that theme this year, but ask a more open-ended question that I think will serve as a through line in everything we'll discuss today. So what's one area that you would highlight that you still feel is the hardest negative ripple effect from the pandemic you're feeling in your jurisdiction, and what can be done about it? What's being done to address it? And Chairman Mendelson, I'll start with you on that question. What's an area you'd highlight that DC's feeling the ripple effects from the pandemic the hardest, and how are you looking to lessen that impact?
I would highlight the need to get the federal workforce back downtown. This is the problem we're seeing across the country in cities, but it's especially a problem here in the district. We just are not back to the number of people downtown, and that in turn is affecting retail. It's affecting property taxes. It's affecting all kinds of economic activity. It's almost like, I want to say it's comparable to base closings. When the federal government closes a military base, they actually provide some assistance and they sort of have a whole phase-in plan. Same effect here, but we're not getting any of that benefit. We're just lacking people and as a result, lacking economic activity.
And we'll be talking a lot more about commercial property values a little later on. County Executive Elrich, I have the same question for you as it pertains to Montgomery County. How's the county feeling the ripple effects from the pandemic, and what are you trying to do about it?
I think, I'd probably agree with Phil, though ours is, more generic. We're not as dependent on federal workers here in the county, and a lot of the workers in the county are in places with labs where you actually still have to come into work. But the general, the general vacancy rate continues to be an ongoing problem. I will say I think people are beginning to see signs that they can actually convert buildings. When this whole thing started, people were saying, oh my God, never going to be able to convert an office building into a residential facility. Well, we've seen major office building converted into lab space, which is another thing people said wouldn't happen. We're, beginning to see the ability to do this with housing. So that may buffer this somewhat. We have, somewhat fewer empty buildings, but, I think that the folks who own the property would say they're struggling to get everybody back. And more than that, everybody back on a regular frequency, because you may still have property leased, but the businesses on the ground floor at street level that depend on your employees to be customers before, after, and during work, if they're not back in the offices, even if the space is leased, you're not seeing the benefit that you would get at the ground floor. So we're hoping that there's some recovery in that area coming back. We continue to be pretty aggressive about recruiting companies to Montgomery County. We've had a lot of luck in life sciences, but life sciences aren't parked, in downtown Bethesda or downtown Silver Spring.
And those vacancies are such a big problem right now across the region. Supervisor Gross, I'd move to you talking about Fairfax. How are you all feeling the ripple effect from the pandemic? What would you highlight as one of the main ones?
Thank you. I would sort of a hybrid of what's already been discussed. Northern Virginia has nearly 130,000 open jobs, and more than half of those are in Fairfax County. A lot of those are in cyber and security and so forth. But so I think it's the jobs piece. It's the federal contractors, especially with a looming federal shutdown, that's just going to exacerbate some of the challenges to recover from the pandemic. Repurposing buildings, absolutely, that is something that we're doing in Fairfax County, but it goes to a larger issue, which I know encompasses the entire national capital region, and that's affordable and attainable housing. So one of the things that the pandemic did not only was hit our businesses hard, it created a lot of challenges for housing for folks. Rents went up. People lost their housing because of evictions, because they weren't getting the jobs. There are just a lot of connections here in the region. And I know my colleagues, both Phil Mendelson and Mark Elrich, and Calvin too, Calvin Hawkins, we're all on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Board. And those are issues that run across the region, regardless of where the river is.
Absolutely. And we'll be talking more about housing as well. Councilmember Hawkins, how about Prince George's County? What would you highlight? You're still muted.
Thank you. Believe it or not, everything that has been said represent what is going on in Prince George's County. But 95% of all businesses in Prince George's County are considered small businesses. And one of the challenges we are facing, the number of small businesses that were not able to sustain during the COVID-19. And we also are dealing with how we get more residents back engaged in retail buying, because I think online shopping has really impacted our retail in the county. So I wanted to say that's probably the biggest challenge with our retail and commercial, what our companies are experiencing as a result of COVID.
Thank you. That's fascinating, and I'm looking forward to talking more about retail and commercial spaces. But before we get to that, I'm going to jump into a very big topic that I know is top of mind for many residents in the district and the region in general: public safety. And it's for good reason. DC made big news this week, having just eclipsed 200 homicides at the earliest point since 1997. And across the region, police departments are struggling with staffing shortages, gun violence, crimes involving youths. Those all have been points of concern. So County Executive Elrich, I'll begin with you on this question. When you hear from people who live and work in Montgomery County about public safety, what comes up most frequently, and what do you say in response to your constituents?
So there are more than one thing that comes up when we talk about this. Obviously, the most heinous things that people see are the first things people extrapolate to everything. You know, the worst becomes the norm for a lot of people, and you know, it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. And there's a lot of concern over, you know, carjackings and, you know, some of the robberies, you know, the store robberies where massive people come in. We haven't quite had that to the extent that other jurisdictions have had, but we've had some of it for sure. I think it all leads to a, you know, kind of increased sense of insecurity. We've, you know, tried to deal with this. We have more cameras than I ever thought I would see in Montgomery County. Every police car is now equipped with a dash camera that reads license plates. We can identify stolen cars much more quickly. So if you're driving in Montgomery County and you've got a car with a hot tag or, you know, the wrong tag, we're going to be finding it. And we found it to, you know, be effective in the work we're doing. We're starting a drone as a first responder because we're going to try this in 2 places where we get a drone in the air really quickly that's able to get to a scene, above a scene, before an officer might be able to get there, could potentially follow a suspect before an officer got there. So we're being pretty aggressive about that. The other thing is that the youth violence, which you mentioned, which is a big issue because, you know, I've been a little bit outspoken on this for some people. I think the legislature was very well intended in saying we've got to end this school to prison pipeline and we don't want you arresting everybody. But unfortunately, what it's done for a lot of young people, not a lot, but whatever, large enough to make an imprint in the news, is a lot of kids are saying, you know, well, great, so I can go out and do this tonight. You can arrest me, bring me in. I'm going to be out in the street, and I'm going to tell you I'm going to do it again because I know you can't hold me and you can't charge me. That is really alarming. I think that's one of the most alarming aspects of this. And, you know, I'm a big believer that there are social determinants that underlie this with kids. This is primarily minority youth. If I could sit in their shoes, I'd probably look at the world and not feel there's a lot of possibility for me. If you come out of poverty and you've been generationally in poverty and you live amidst it, it's hard to figure that you're going to have a way out any more than your parents had a way out. And I think it leads to a sense of what's the point. And, you know, I was a school teacher and I saw that in 10 and 11-year-old kids sometimes. And that's really alarming. And we have no facilities. So when you say you're not going to jail, doesn't mean anybody's going to get any help. And if the parent says, you know, that my child's out of control, sending them back to their parent means there's absolutely not going to be any change in the degree of control the parents have. I really think the state, and we ought to regionally be thinking about what kind of non-criminal facilities can we create where a kid who is struggling enough that their behaviors have been problematic in what we would call a criminal world, where you can get them an education, you can get them training, you can get them counseling, and kind of pull them back from the edge they've put themselves on. And yes, it's not going to be cheap, but just walking away from this problem is not going to be cheap. Putting them back in jail is not going to be cheap, and it's going to be long-term a problem. And we really need to think about, you know, these kids will grow up to be adults and they'll raise children. It would be really good to intervene now and help them get on a path where they understand not only what they need to do now, but have a sense of what their possibilities are going forward and choose a better adult life than they otherwise might find themselves cast into.
Right. And Supervisor Gross, moving to you here and keeping with this theme of a regional approach, you mentioned you're on the COG, you started in 1996, and I know you've worked with leaders around the region on issues pertaining to public safety. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how the sentiment around public safety changed from maybe that time around when you started in the 90s to now? What parallels do you see or differences do you see?
Oh my. Well, I will say that Fairfax County still is the safest jurisdiction of its size in the country. And it was that way when I started in 1996. But I think the challenges we have now that we talk about at COG especially, back in, I think it was 2004, we did a gang summit. We had 500 people show up for a gang summit. It was extraordinary, but we were very much into, with the gang issues were really starting to be apparent across the region. I think a lot of that now has gone away and they're more localized, but we had a lot of work with the Department of Justice and some work with their Office of Juvenile, I think, I can't remember the name of it, it's Juvenile Justice something or other. So that what Mark is talking about with young people, that was sort of something that we were focused on. I think now we are all having challenges with the number of police officers. Policing is very, very difficult these days. It's never been easy, but it's really hard these days. And so I think I know that the Washington, D.C., the district has been talking about more officers. In Fairfax County, we've been down a number of officers. We just recruited 56 people in April, which was the largest recruiting class we've seen in over a decade. And we have another class coming through now, but it is very difficult to find, qualified folks to serve as our police officers. So the other piece, I think, that is of concern to us in Fairfax County, and I suspect in other areas, and that is just the number of pedestrian fatalities that we have in our communities, and the number of the amount of distracted and reckless driving that is happening. And we're really seeing it since the pandemic ended. People are back on the roads and we're seeing it all over the place. But there's another piece that really wasn't part of our public safety discussion years ago, and that is the mental health piece to all of this. And what we've seen in Fairfax County recently, which is over the last couple of years, which has been very concerning to me, is the number of family domestic violence issues that we've had, where parents are killing their adult children or their adult children are killing their parents. And you go, what in the world is going on? Part of this, a lot of this, I think, has mental health issues. And so looking at the co-responder program that some of us in the region are putting in is going to have a lot of, I think, a lot of help. It will probably change some of the ways we police, and that's a good thing. But we're seeing more and more issues with mental health and the need for either inpatient or outpatient. If people didn't have to wait 6 or 8 weeks to see a doctor, it would be really great. But we don't have enough police officers. We also don't have enough psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth who can actually take on these additional challenges. And we're seeing that at the local level, we're seeing it at the hospital level, and we're seeing it, I think, probably nationally. Mental health is a huge issue for us that was not there, or at least was not discussed 20, 25 years ago.
I appreciate the thorough response. Thank you, Supervisor. And then Councilmember Hawkins, Prince George's County last year, August 2022, saw its deadliest month in decades in terms of killings, homicides, 24 compared to the monthly average of 8. I'm curious, how things have gone since then. What has the county learned? And then, sticking with the point Supervisor Gross made about staffing, is Prince George's County seeing those acute challenges around staffing?
First, yes, we are experiencing challenges around recruiting men and women for our law enforcement, particularly the Prince George's County Police Department. When you reference what occurred last year, that the most deadliest month, the county exec had the insight to set up a curfew, as you may well know, and that was really effective. What we've had a chance to do with our young people, like all around the region, probably all around the country, is try to adjust to the level of violence that's occurring among them. And as the county exec said, it probably wasn't the intent, but the laws are so lenient. A guy to young kid told me the other day, Mr. Councilmember, They locked me up. I'm gonna be back out the next day. And he was planning. He and his friends were planning to carjack someone. And I just happened to talk with them and learned that they were up to no good. We talked it through, and I had a chance to talk with Rock Newman, the former boxing promoter, and he raised a good point. He said, no, those young kids, when you see them like that, they call it free cars. I said, well, they can hurt someone. And so I think, like what the county exec said, we do need some locations or some facilities where we could get these young people the help they need. But I don't think we should leave them, allow them to stay in our communities if they are repeat offenders of criminal activities that are impacting not just those they're involved with, but innocent adults and even innocent children. Lastly, I wanted to say on that mental health piece, the county exec, with the council support, as you know, we opened over at Luminous Hospital a mental health facility to try to deal with some of these situations and make sure our county police are not taking on that burden, which they should not. And lastly, as you all know, as we are attempting to recruit in the region more law enforcement officials, with all this police accountability and everyone bringing out their video cameras, the police officer's job is very difficult. So those are some of the things we're trying to tackle as well. How can we deal with some of the challenges they face, the good police officers? So we will see. We will see.
Chair Mendelson, it's been a busy week in DC. As I mentioned, we hit that 200 marker, but then also we had the confirmation hearing for the acting police chief, Pamela Smith, who's relatively new to the job. There's been a lot the other panelists have talked about in the realm of public safety. I think the juvenile topic is interesting. I think staffing is interesting. I might let you go whichever way you want to in terms of DC's problems and what you think the city should be most focused on right now.
Thank you. A few things. First of all, we did have the hearing this week on the mayor's nomination for a new chief of police, and I expect that nomination will be confirmed by the council fairly soon. I think the chief will be very helpful with regard to the Metropolitan Police Department, but one person, one chief is not the solution to the entire concern about crime. The second thing I want to say is that whatever the statistics are or the reality is, perception is what's most important when we're talking about public safety. And there's no question but that folks around the region and in the district are very concerned about public safety. I do want to take a moment to criticize Congress, particularly our friends, and I don't say that with a lot of sincerity, in the House, who have, I think, really hurt the district by claiming that there's a crime crisis. That's the language, a crime crisis. All that does is just elevate everybody's insecurity with regard to safety. The fact is that Congress has not been helpful to us with regard to public safety. What most folks don't realize is that in the House side, what they have done to the federal appropriation bill, and they don't appropriate our budget, but they do appropriate money for different agencies like the courts and the U.S. Attorney, and they're simply underfunding. There is a federal reimbursement to our Metropolitan Police Department that the House Republicans have cut by about $20 million. So they are actually making the problem worse for us. There is some legislation pending in the council and that the council adopted in the summer. I think sometimes the rhetoric lends itself easily to saying, well, all that has to happen is that the council pass a law. In fact, that's not all that has to happen. Actually, pretty much everything illegal that takes place is because there already is a law. What I think is that where we can get some short-term benefits is focus on some strategies that will make an immediate difference, like working with our police who are understaffed, as is the case around the region and around the country. Are there some other ways that we can provide, I want to say manpower, but I think the correct term is person power, to help with public safety, to just try to think more creatively about that, and what resources can we give our police so that they can close more cases more quickly? What can we do to ensure that prosecutions are more quick and more aggressive? I think those are immediate strategies that could make a difference. The council of the District of Columbia has moderated a bit on the issue of public safety. I hear a lot of criticism. This is criticism of a council from about 2 or 3 years ago. Michael, you know this, just a few months ago, the council reversed a decision from 2020 to restore and voted to restore school resource officers. We've been fully funding what the Metropolitan Police Department's request has been for funding. So we are very much, as our colleagues around the region, looking for ways that we can improve public safety.
Thank you, Chairman. Shifting gears to perhaps the biggest unifier of all the jurisdictions represented on this panel, Metro, whose board is currently trying to figure out how to fill a $750 million gap in next year's budget. Metro leaders are actually recently outlined a few scenarios that would involve drawing from its capital budget to fund operating expenses, potentially at the cost of long-term fixes and upgrades. But system leaders say they'll likely need more financial help across the board from lawmakers in Maryland, DC, and Virginia to avoid service interruptions. So there's no easy answers here, but I'm going to start with you, Supervisor Gross. What's your take on Metro's funding challenge and the proposals that have been discussed so far? Is there a long-term solution to this?
That's a very good question. I think that's one of the things that COG and Metro and a number of other organizations are trying to work out together. It's been with fits and starts, as I understand, but this is so critical to the region. It doesn't matter whether you're in the District of Columbia, whether you're in Maryland or in Virginia, Metro is a foundational transportation system for us. And it has been for a long time. I remember when the very first Metro stations opened, it was from DuPont Circle to Union Station on the Red Line in I think it was 1976. And it's progressed to be a remarkable system for us. But part of the challenge is the funding mechanisms are different throughout the various jurisdictions. As I understand it, Maryland, the state of Maryland, funds a lot of the shares of the localities. In Virginia, the Commonwealth doesn't support it. Occasionally there's been a special bill done in the General Assembly, but it's up to the individual municipalities and counties to come up with their share. And then of course the District of Columbia has a different kind of funding system. And so as long as we have these really very different kinds of funding mechanisms and such incredible needs by Metro, we're going to be in a world of hurt. I do think, there's a lot of, sometimes we don't want to talk about reopening the compact, the Metro compact, and that would be rife with risk, but we need to leave no stone unturned to find a way to equitably fund Metro. We're not there yet. I think under the new general manager at Metro, we probably have a better chance of having those constructive conversations, but it's going to be a long haul. And I'm really sad to say that because I'd like to be much more optimistic. But at this particular point, it's either a very, very tall mountain to climb or it's a very deep hole to get out of. I think it's probably the deep hole.
Councilmember Hawkins, is your view as perhaps pessimistic as the supervisors when you look at Metro's funding challenge in the short and long term? And then what's the county's role in figuring out what comes next?
With the number of Metro stations we have in Prince George's County, of course, we are very concerned and very supportive of a solution that continues the operation of Metro. With New Carrollton, with Union Station getting ready to go offline, New Carrollton will become the East Coast corridor, if you will, and in place of Union Station. As we talk about what's going on with Metro. We are very supportive of our governor and our state reps doing what we need to do with the other regional leaders to put money there to fix it. But there's always something about Metro needing more money. But the number of our residents and businesses that rely on Metro, and with our intent of building transit oriented development around our Metro stations, because we had not been doing that. So now, unlike the rest of the region, we are just starting to build around our metros. So, of course, we are supportive of doing what needs to happen to get it done. But I do think uh, what was said just now by Penny is really the issue we're all facing. How do we make this happen, especially as a local, because our money funds come from the state. So we're dealing with that. We have a voice, but we're not at the table, if you will.
Chairman Mendelson, no doubt Metro is critical to the district. What's your view on the funding gap and some of the solutions that have been tossed around about how to fund it?
Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, I think there's going to be a short-term solution and a long-term solution. In order for Maryland and Virginia to step up, if the state is involved, the state is going to have to make decisions when the legislatures convene in January. That's 3 months from now. We're not going to have a long-term solution in the next 3 months. What's happening right now, and Penny alluded to this, is that the regional leaders are meeting through the Council of Governments. We are first trying to analyze the numbers and actually looking to the district's chief financial officer or his office to analyze the numbers, just as was done in 2018. When we get a better sense of what the real number is, and I got to tell you, just to illustrate this, in July, we were told it was about a $750 million challenge. Today, we're told it's about a $650 million challenge. When we get what the real number is, then the regional representatives are going to talk about, well, how are we going to divide this up and how are we going to fund this? It is an opportunity to revisit how we are funding WMATA. I mean, personally, I think ideally if there was a regional tax, but I don't know that the regional jurisdictions will all agree to that. But the point I want to make is that there's an opportunity to revisit how we fund. But there'll be a short-term solution. What can we do for the fiscal year, WMATA's fiscal year that starts next July? And if it involves the legislatures, there'll be a quick fix. And then we'll be looking for a long-term solution that will address not only this fiscal cliff, because the federal money is going away next year, the federal COVID relief money is going away, but also there have been some questions about whether the capital funding is sustainable or whether it runs out in a few years. In that regard, anyone who suggests that we can shift capital money to operating because there is authority to do that, it's a mistake. What it does is it just brings a capital crisis, this state of good repair. It just accelerates that being a concern. There was a derailment today, and that highlights the need for safety. So shifting capital is not going to be a solution, and service cuts are not going to be a solution. Service cuts would be devastating. In order for service cuts to get us close to $650 million, we would be closing down dozens of metro stations, or we would simply be eliminating scores of bus routes. So that is not like we'll just change bus service from 10-minute to 15-minute frequencies. No, it would be much more dramatic than that. So I want to go back to, there'll be short and long-term solutions. Everybody in the region is working together on this. We're trying to get a better handle on what the number is, and then we will have the fun debate over how to actually meet the funding.
Sticking with you quickly, Chairman, you had a proposal late last year with Councilmember Charles Allen to make Metro bus rides free in the district. It didn't work out. the Metro Board, I think, actually dissuaded that idea, said it wasn't right. But I'm curious if you feel as though that's a possibility still, considering the state of funding with Metro.
I think it's in our future, but I'm not sure it's on the table for right now. That would be a District of Columbia cost. We can pay for buses through district riders and district government subsidy, or we can pay for district buses through a district government subsidy. I'm making that point to emphasize that whoever goes fare free, it's that jurisdiction that's going to share the cost of that or bear the cost of that. But it's just not part of this discussion right now.
Right. County Executive Elrich, what's your view on Metro's challenge right now, particularly this component about whether to draw from the capital budget or to what extent to do that?
So without a better analysis of what the cost to draw from the capital budget is, it's hard to say. The one item I thought was interesting is people have pointed out that, we're rotating cars faster than a lot of other systems are rotating cars. I'm really concerned about, things like track maintenance and the operating part of it. But I think one legitimate question is to ask, do we need to replace the vehicles as quickly as we're doing it, or can we go a little bit longer like other jurisdictions? That would buy a little bit of space, but I think, as everybody knows, it doesn't solve the problem. The bigger problem is, how this thing's been paid for. I don't think nobody's mentioned it, but maybe is the federal government's been absolutely absent. And this whole thing was built, on the heels of, let's be blunt, it was built on the heels of white flight out of DC. When the federal workers left, many of them left the District of Columbia, and it was a means of bringing those people to work back into the district. That's why the Metro line in Montgomery County is more designed to move people from the suburb into the city than to provide inter-county connectivity. It's not the kind of subway system you would build if you were building a subway system for the actual county. The feds pay nothing. They've kind of been able to take a walk on it. And in my mind, they're kind of like a jurisdiction down there. They are the federal city. And we're hauling people into the federal city, and the federal city ought to understand they have a place in this. The other thing I think, they should have done this in the beginning. It was talked about, and the usual forces kept it from happening. But you think about all the Metro stops. Before the Metro stops are there, most of them were sitting on 1- and 2-story buildings, almost no development. And the Metro stops come in, and then you see a world of development, massive increases in property values. None of that went to Metro. So you put all this public money into the system, you create all this private wealth, and you capture none of the private wealth to support the system and leave everything on the backs of ordinary taxpayers. And I've suggested that we ought to look at a regional tax around the half mile around Metro for everybody. I wouldn't drive the tax so high that you wouldn't be able to keep your businesses open, but they certainly ought to contribute to it, because they certainly benefited massively from the public investment. And this is just, it's an endemic problem. We deal with infrastructure. The people who benefit the most often pay the least. And, this is Metro's kind of a good example of that. This one difference between us and Fairfax County in Maryland, it's true that the state pays the county piece. On the other hand, in Maryland, we pay for all the roads in Montgomery County. We pay for 2,000 miles of roads, which is probably over 10,000 lane miles of roads. And in Virginia, the roads are paid for by the state. So it's not like we're getting a free ride off this and not paying for it. Just in our state, the state divvied up differently who's responsible for which piece of the pie. I'm not opposed to a slight fare increase. I agree with Phil that anything other than a little tinkering with stops would be disastrous for people. It would actually undermine Metro. Anything you do that reduces service, it reduces the ridership, which reduces the fare box. The trains aren't any cheaper to run if they're 10 people less per car. Doesn't make that train any cheaper to run. So it'd be like shooting yourself in the foot. So I think we need to be careful, but we got to be serious. We cannot lose this. It's critical to DC, it's critical to our workers. And I can only, people just need to think, what would happen to your roadways if all these people wind up back on the road? It would be an unmitigated disaster.
Supervisor Gross, I saw you nodding your head when the idea of kind of that federal support or what their role in this came up. You want to elaborate a little more?
It's just that I was glad that Mark brought that up, because one of the things I thought of was, doggone it, I didn't mention the federal government when I was making my remarks. But I think another thing that Mark brings up, and it's something I know we talked about when we were preparing for this, there are specific legal differences in the structures of the District of Columbia, the municipalities in Maryland, and those in Virginia. We are in different legal structures, and so we do have a lot of people will look and say we're all all the same. No, and those legal structures do provide us some real challenges, differences between the Dillon rule, between home rule, and then the unique structure of the District of Columbia. So what Mark was saying about, what the state pays for some things and then we get it on the other side in Virginia, that's something we all are aware of as elected officials. I'm not sure the community is as aware of that, those differences. It has been a challenge for us all the time.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the community and sticking with Metro, I'll toss this one to you, Chairman Mendelson. Are residents happy with Metro's performance? Are they happy with the new general manager? He's been in place for a little over a year. How are people feeling about the system and how it's working?
My better sense of it is that residents are not unhappy. I can't say that very many people stop me and say, hey, I'm really happy with Randy Clark. But I'm not hearing complaints. More importantly, the safety issue seems to have drifted off of the front page and even drifted off of the back pages. There was a derailment today. We'll learn more about that as in the next few days. But generally, I'm just not hearing the complaints about safety. I'm not hearing the complaints about reliability. And if anything, I'm hearing support for being more helpful to WMATA.
Councilmember Hawkins, how about you in Prince George's? What are people saying about Metro?
From what I gather, everyone is what the chair said previous to my comments. They're not saying anything negative about it. They're just happy to have an opportunity to ride back and forth. Only challenges, with some of the youth crime that may occur infrequently, and I don't know if I should use the term infrequently, but I will, on the Metro buses. But yeah, he gets a pass at this time. Under the circumstance, he and his team has to satisfy the leadership in 3 different jurisdictions. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, Metro's doing pretty good.
Well, I'll keep us moving along. We have about 15 minutes left. Obviously, while Metro ridership is increasing from where it was in the midst of the worst of the pandemic, one challenge for the system and the region, and some of you touched on it in that first question, is the prevalence of remote work. In April, the Washington Post poll found that DC area workers who participated in the poll, nearly half said they had jobs that could be done remotely. The prevalence of remote work has an obvious impact on office vacancies, and those correspond directly with lower commercial property values. That impacts taxes and can compromise funding for public services across the region. So I'll go back to you, Chairman Mendelson, with this question. DC's government has given a lot of attention to the vacancy issue, particularly because there's the unique federal component. But I'm curious what you found to be of the solutions that have been tossed around. What show the most promise in dealing with the vacant buildings we have in our downtown?
Well, we are trying to encourage conversion of office space to residential. I think everybody's looking at that now. Many office buildings don't lend themselves to conversion. It just has to do with the design of what's called the floor plate, and whether you can really get nice apartments out of those office buildings. But that's one of our strategies. We also have been looking at incentivizing the development of more residential downtown. But that's kind of more of a long-term strategy. I think short-term strategies are looking at ways to activate what's going on. Now, I see more people on our streets downtown. I don't actually hear a lot of folks acknowledging that, but I see a lot more people and a lot more cars downtown than just a couple of months ago. But I think we need to do more to activate, and that means activities. That's what I mean when I say activate. Things like if we could do that barbecue battle every week on downtown streets, that would bring a lot of folks in. But there are other activities that can occur. I think we need to do more with arts and humanities activities, like take some of the vacant retail space and put some sort of arts pop-up in that space. Pop-up means it's temporary, doesn't require the entire build out, but it's something that would attract more people downtown or keep people doing stuff after work, make the downtown more interesting. I think strategies like that, and I think I touched on this at the beginning. We also have to recognize that public safety, perception of public safety is important. And if folks feel like it's not safe, then they're not going to show up and activate. So that's got to be part of the strategy as well. I see long-term strategies, short-term strategies, and the short-term are what I think are most important.
Just like the Metro, County Executive Elrich, the Post reported in August that office vacancy rates in Montgomery County were rising faster than neighboring jurisdictions. I think that information actually came from an analysis from your office. Doesn't sound like a great figure. So what are the ramifications for the county and what are you doing about it?
Well, I mean, the long-term ramifications, depending on long-term, it depends on how long-term it is that obviously it'll lead to people requesting reassessments and lower assessments, which will generate lower taxes. The county's actually been through this once before. I think in the mid-90s, there was an enormous switch in the property tax that we got from the commercial sector, and I would assume is because of a recessionary impact on businesses. So what we're trying to do is we've continue to be very aggressive about recruiting people here. I mean, the best antidote to this stuff is to fill it back up again. It does present opportunities for people who wanted to be close to a metro, but hadn't been able to find space close to a metro, to actually relook at some of these areas and hopefully rethink whether this is an opportunity to move closer to there. I just talked with somebody the other day whose 38,000 feet is going to shrink to 15,000 square feet. They don't ever anticipate bringing back their workforce. And so there's going to be 23,000 square feet that go up for rent. I think Phil's right that, conversions are a long-term process. You still have to have the demand for housing. And, despite what we say about demand, none of this will be affordable, or almost none of it will be affordable. And that's where the bulk of the demand is. So there's a real disconnect, which a lot of people don't like to talk about. There's a disconnect when you say there's a demand for housing and what are we doing about it and who's demanding housing? Because if you don't house those people, the number of people who can afford expensive market unit is actually only a fraction. And in our county, a smaller fraction of people looking for housing rather than the total demand for housing. So that's something that we're going to have to think about. I like Phil's idea about pop-ups. I'm a big believer in putting pop-ups in and reactivating streets. I think some landlords may have to surrender on the price point of their rent. We've heard people say, they wanted to go here, but the rent is extraordinary. I've talked to restaurants and retail people who lost spaces they were renting in the middle of all this because they couldn't meet increased rents that landlords wanted. I mean, sometimes you wonder whether this is a self-inflicted thing, but it's really troubling because when there are people who want space in these cores, it's a shame they're not able to get the space in the cores. So I think, we will continue to work through it. We're trying to make sure. I'm a big believer in telework, but I'm not a big believer in everybody teleworking every day. Not just for the economic reason, but I do think that a workplace where people don't have the opportunity to sit, talk to each other and do face-to-face stuff, that you lose something. And so I'm more than happy to figure out what's a good split over a 10-day period, how many days in, how many days out, but there need to be days in. And if we can flex them across a week, we could put more people on the ground during the day for lunch and things like that on every day of the week. So it is not going to be easy. Nothing you've talked about today
Yeah.
is easy to
That's
solve.
that's the theme of the day. And then Councilmember Hawkins, that's a good transition to you on this question. Prince George's County Council had a pretty interesting debate recently on a policy that would have changed the legislature's rules, allowing virtual votes or for members to vote remotely. You were not supportive of that measure, and it failed. But I'm curious if there are any parallels to draw between that debate that happened within the council and this larger conversation we're having about the role remote work plays in our region and how you balance those needs.
Michael, I thought I would get through this without having to respond to it, but thank you for raising that issue. The issue was strictly about whether in our rules during COVID-19, you were able to vote and participate remotely. You still can participate virtually, but you cannot vote as a council member. That rule was to allow someone that will be out for a period of time to still have the ability to vote, not just participate virtually, but vote. I didn't support that, and it became a women's rights issue. So I want you to know, last Tuesday, we had another vote on it, and Council Member at Large Mel Franklin and I supported the bill, which would now, you needed 8 to adopt. So we're moving forward on it. I'm gonna leave it at that.
All right, let's leave it at that. Supervisor Gross, what about you in Fairfax? What's the conversation like when it comes to commercial property values and the impact on Northern Virginia and the county? What are you feeling about the trajectory in this area?
We're seeing some of the same challenges. But I want to talk a little bit about the conversion of office space, because we talk a lot about making it into housing. And of course, as Phil said, floor plates have to be correct and so forth to be able to do that. But one of the things we did in my district a few years ago, there was a vacant 3-story office building in the Seven Corners area. We needed a new elementary school because one of our schools was so overcrowded. We were able to get that building in foreclosure. And in 9 months, from the time we got it to the time the school opened, was exactly 9 months. We essentially gutted the building, inserted a school, 3 stories, first urban school in Fairfax County. And if you look at it from the outside, if it didn't say Bailey's Upper Elementary, you probably wouldn't know it was a school. It looks exactly the same. It fits in with Seven Corners. And so I think we need to look at opportunities for repurposing buildings, not just as a living space, could also be live work. You know, that is a way. I've got some other buildings in my district that are live work units that have been repurposed so that you can maintain your small business and live in the same place. Most of these are going to be small consulting firms that don't have a lot of employees, but still it's a way to keep some of the costs down. So I do think we need to look more broadly at what are the innovative ideas that can be used in repurposing buildings. I also want to talk a little bit about activating downtown. Fairfax County is, 400 square miles and 1.2 million people, and we don't have any real towns or cities. We just have areas. But Tysons is our downtown. 25 years ago, we started working on activating Tysons as a downtown. Now, excitingly, I saw an article just this week. People were talking about, Tysons, you've got 25,000 people living in Tysons as well as, the 100,000 that work there. It took us 25 years to get to that point. It is taking place now. And so I want to make sure that folks recognize that it takes a good deal of time to actually make that activation a permanent situation. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but you have to have in place the rules and regulations, the zoning pieces and so forth that will make it successful. And that's what we're doing at Tysons. I hope it's equally as successful in other areas.
Thank you. And we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to go with County Executive Elrich. I know you wanted me to ask you about affordable housing. You touched on it a little bit in your previous response, but you said repeatedly there's this unmet need in the county, and it seems like everyone is in agreement with that. But this problem's not going away. I'm curious, like, where's your head at right now in how maybe the county, but the region in general needs to be thinking about this problem perhaps differently than it has been?
Yeah, I think, man, no short answer to this one. So look, we've got some real challenges. There's this projection of who is coming to Montgomery County. And I objected to part of the projection just because they ignored our minimum wage. And so they underestimated, or they lowered the incomes of the people they projected to come here, which I thought was created an artificial worse crisis than the bad crisis that's already there. But if you say 40,000 households are coming here, they also said 10,000 were market, and 3/4 of them, 75%, were below market. And of the below market would be below $75,000 in income. 2/3 of them, 50% of the total households, would be below 50% of AMI, area median income. You're not going to solve that problem with high rises in Bethesda. And we zoned Bethesda as pretty much exclusively 1 and 2 bedroom apartments or condos. They are absolutely unaffordable. If you're a teacher, if you're a young professional making $80,000 a year, good luck finding an apartment in Bethesda, which you could afford $2,000 for. Good luck finding it. So our zoning and our policies don't match the needs of the people. Bethesda was not zoned to house all the people who live in Montgomery County. It was zoned to serve certain people, and we all know what those people look like. And this policy kind of continues. I think we need to have inclusive plans, not just inclusive zoning, so that your plans actually result in the building of more affordable buildings. If everything is high rise, nothing's affordable. You need to be able to tent down and have 5- and 6-story structures that are built in stick. So whether it's the private sector being able to have more flexibility on the price, or whether it's the government going in and saying, we'll subsidize X number of units, we need to be able to do that. On our part, we are very aggressively making deals with people, but we're not making the deals we used to make. We are asking and getting, which is the nice part, higher levels of affordability. We're beginning to get ownership, and we're going to continue to push in that. And we're actually looking at doing development in our own way, bringing in actual people to build for us, not bringing a developer and say, give us a piece of what you got here, but just saying, do a design, bring in the builders in and out. The property goes either to the county to a nonprofit, and we can take some of the people who take a piece out of the middle, figure out how many people we can remove from taking a bite out of the pie, so that there's more left in the pie for people who really need it. So we're looking at all fronts on this. We just passed rent stabilization in Montgomery County. It wasn't an ideal bill, but it was, damn sight better than what it was before, and it will stabilize rents for some people. I still think 6%, let's say inflation plus 3%, is absolutely unreasonable. Landlords haven't done that for the last 30 years. I didn't understand why the council insisted on putting that in there. But all that said, the market for a lot of these people will dictate and keep them under the inflation plus 3%. I will say finally that inflation and housing costs affect people differently. If you have enough money that you can choose where you live, then landlords got to be careful what they do with you, because if they push you too high, you can just say, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to, I'll go to this other building. It's nice. I can get what I want, and I'm not paying so much. Low income people, no such thing. If the landlord raises the rent, it's not like you can say, well, there's lots of affordable housing in Montgomery County. I'm just going to go over there. You're going nowhere. And that's why we've got 50,000 households spending 50 to 60% of their income on housing, and all the other jurisdictions have similar problems. Those people are stuck because they can't walk, because they don't have the money to walk with. So it's complex.
Absolutely, and thank you. Thank you to all our panelists. I have this problem every year where I wish we had another hour to keep going on these topics. All of your responses have been so insightful. So thank you again, Chairman Mendelson, Mr. Hawkins, Supervisor Gross, and County Executive Elrich. It's been a pleasure. I'm Michael Bryce Sadler again with the Washington Post. Thank you for participating in this panel and watching.
Thank you.